How do you prepare to become a successful author? Today we're going to be talking about that. If we're just meeting, my name is Julia Amante. I'm a women's fiction author. All right, so let me tell you a story of when I first started writing. So I sold my first novel in 1998, and it was published in 2000. So this was with Kensington Press, and it was great. I sold 4 books to them. This was a romance line called Encanto Books, and they lasted a couple of years. So it was a very unique concept of having English and Spanish books together, and all in one volume. So you had half in English, half in Spanish. So it was a new concept. It was all Latino romances, meaning that the characters were Latino and shared their experiences. You know, the Latino experience was part of the story, the whole feel and vibe of the books. So anyhow, I sold 4 books, and at the end of 2 years, my first one had been released. My second one was about to be released, and I decided to close the line because sales just weren't what they expected. So they thought, well, maybe America just isn't ready for these type of books, so they got rid of them. So at that point, I thought, while this was going on, and as authors, what we think is we're just waiting for that day when we get published, right? If we're looking at publishing with a traditional publisher, we're thinking, this is great. Once I finally get published, once I finally sell my novel, it's going to be fantastic. I'll be writing books. They'll be buying books from me, and eventually I'm going to become, a huge successful author, and I'm going to have, a great life as a writer. But one of the things that I want to mention is that, success as an author, first of all, you have to define what success means to you, right? So it's not going to be the same thing for everyone. There are some people that want to write for niche markets, and they don't really want to have best-selling books because they're not writing those type of books. They're really writing for a certain market, and that's great, and that's successful. If you can get the readers from that market and they're buying your books, then you're successful because you're reaching the audience that you want. But you have to define that for yourself. You have to figure out, like, what is it that would make me feel like I was a successful author. But what I want to mention is that it's not a straight line. Okay, so it's not, if you're thinking, okay, you do want to be a best-selling author, you do want to have just your books go out to, and have it in every grocery store and Target and Walmart and everything. Well, then you have to understand it's not going to be like I thought, right? Like, I'm going to sell these books, and now I've got the publisher, and it's going to be fantastic, and I'm on my way to being a huge success. No, the way that my career went was that it is going, is it went up, and then this line folded, and then it took 3 years before I was republished by Berkeley Press. And at that point, I had changed, not really changed, well, yeah, I guess I did change my the type of books that I was writing. So with Encanto, they were strictly romance. They were strictly romance novels. Then with Berkeley, it was considered chick lit, right? So think like Bridget Jones' Diary and all that. So it was different. There was a romance, of course, part of it, but it was more of the heroine's journey through her life. Like, what is it that she's going through? Like, what is it that she is looking for in life? What is she looking for in love, and all of that? So it was a different style of book. So with Berkeley, I sold 2 books, and I thought, again, right, okay, great, I've got a publisher again. These are one of them was very, very popular. The first one that I wrote, over time, I noticed that it just picked up steam and was picked up by. I got a call from a lawyer in LA, an entertainment lawyer, and she wanted to buy the rights to sell it to the movie studios. It ended up being sold to ABC Family for a TV series, and then that got killed. But during this little time, right, where all this stuff was happening, I was like, okay, awesome. This is going well. But so it went up, went down, and started to go up again. And then after that, after those two books didn't do well enough for the publisher. So they said, well, we're not going to buy any more books from you because you needed to have this amount of sales. It just didn't happen. So at that point, it took me another 3 years to resell my next book. And at that point, so I was writing under a pseudonym, Laura Rios, and this new publisher, which was Hachette, I started writing under Julia Amante. So I changed my name, I changed my style of writing again. So this time I was writing and I'm continues to write women's fiction. And so again, they bought 2 books. It seems to be my pattern, and then that was it, right? So then I said, okay, I've enough of this nonsense. I'm going to work as a self-published author for a while and see how that goes, right? So which is what I'm doing now. But the point is, right, it went up, went down, and went up higher, okay, because I did much better with Berkeley than I did with Kensington, and then it went down, and then it went up with Hachette, and it went higher. So each time, okay, I was doing better. I was selling more books, but not only was I selling more books and expanding my readership and working, with, and the publishers kept getting larger as well, right? So Kensington is sort of a medium-sized publisher. Berkeley had more. Berkeley has now merged with, I don't remember even who, but over time, right, the publishers were more impressive, and also my writing got better. Okay, so if I look back at my first romances and my current work, my writing has improved. It's matured. It's gotten more. The stories have gotten deeper. There's more subplots. There's more better writing. So the journey to success, I guess, is what I'm trying to explain. Is that it's not this like straight up where you're just going to smoothly go up the ladder to best-selling author. It just doesn't happen that way, except for very few people, and then you kind of wonder, well, did it really happen that way, or how many times did they write books that were rejected and we just never heard about it? Okay, so it's not a straight line, but there are things that you can do to prepare, right, to become a successful author. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Okay, the very first thing that I suggest you do is that you practice every day. And I've discussed this before, I've said it before, but you need to practice every day. You need to write every day. When I look back, even before my romances that first sold, when I first started writing, okay, when I really seriously said I'm going to start writing, and I look back at those manuscripts that I still have, they were my practice books, right? So practicing every day and getting better and getting stronger as a writer is part of that growth to become more successful. Like I mentioned, my romances were hopefully good, but they weren't as good as the last few books that I've written and what I'm writing now. I think that we need that practice. And if very few people actually, like I mentioned, are hugely successful immediately. They've been practicing, they've been writing, they've been improving, they've been doing the things that they need to do to become a successful writer. So first thing then is just to practice daily, to try to write every day, even if it's only a page, even if it's only for 15 minutes, it's just that sort of steady practice that helps you get better. Okay, the second thing that I suggest you do is that you think about your audience and situate your books in the correct place for those readers. Okay, so what you want to do is take a look at the market. Where does your book fall? So for me, it was romance, right? So my books had to be similar enough to what other romance books were, right? That were selling. So they had to be. It could be something completely different, right? Because readers wouldn't buy them. There are certain tropes that they like to read, that readers of romance like to read. Same with science fiction, same with historical novels, right? There are certain things or certain historical time periods that people tend to like. So if you wrote a Russian, historical story, I don't know that it would, because I don't know, honestly, I don't know about historical romances, but I don't think that they would sell as well as, like, British, at least in the romance genre, anything set in Britain or, other European countries tend to sell better. It's not a rule, obviously, but you want to look at what is out there. What's selling, what are the common themes, what do people like to read, because you want to situate your book in that, with that readership. Okay, but here's the hard part, right? It has to be unique and different enough that it's not exactly like every other book. If you write the exact same book that has been out there and the same type of stories, then it may sell. Your writing may be unique enough, but you want it, it's not going to stand out. It's not going to be like it's a breakout novel. It might be one of your stepping stone books, though. But just think about, like, what can be unique about it. And sometimes it can be things like your voice, or just your take on a theme or on an idea. Because I've read, I don't know how many romance books about the marriage of convenience, let's say, which is one of the tropes in romance. But the book is different, right? There's something different about each one. It's not the same story. It's sort of the same theme, but it's a little different. And the way the writer writes it is unique. And again, a lot of it has to do with just the language and the voice that the author uses. And some of it has to do with just a really interesting twist. So it's a marriage of convenience, but why is it a marriage of convenience? How did these two people meet? What are they doing? So I remember back a long time ago, gosh, when I was really, really young, and probably in like middle school or high school or something, and I was reading some romances, and they were set like they were in the 1970s. The heroes were always very unheroic. I thought they were just very domineering, and it was very different. But if you read a marriage of convenience story today, they're different. They're interesting. Some of them are funny. So how can you take the same idea but turn it around and make it unique and make it yours, so that when somebody picks it up, they don't even notice that it's the same, that it's the same theme, because it's just like, oh, this is so, this person, I can pick up this book and I know that it's her book. So that's the challenge, is to try to think of what can be unique to you, but also very similar to the genre that you're aiming for, and that the readerships will like. So you want to situate your book in that circle, right, with the readers that like that type of book. Okay, the third thing is to study best practices. So I'm an educator. So I came from elementary school all the way to college, right? So I started off with elementary school, and now I teach college. And one of the things that we always talk about, no matter what level of education, is best practices. And that is, looking at what works the best. Like what do students respond to? What are the best teaching methods? All of that. Well, the same thing I recommend for writers of fiction, okay, is that you look at what are the best practices. What are the things that work for other writers? What do they do? We've talked about some things here, and I know I've mentioned them in my blogs of, looking at like the routines that writers have. What are the things that work? So how do you find that out? Well, a lot of reading. A lot of what you're doing right now is watching videos, reading what writers write in blogs, articles, books, attending conferences if you can, anything that you can do to learn what writers do. At some of these conferences, the interesting thing is that you can choose your workshops, and you can choose some authors that are talking about, this is what I do, this is how I plan my day, this is how I develop my characters, whatever you feel you need help with. But it's nice because you get to hear what they do. So most of us, when we speak, that's what we do, right? We tell you, this is what worked for me. I don't know if it'll work for you, but this is what worked for me. And that is what worked for me. That's exactly what I did, is I just read everything I could find. I tried to go to conferences and workshops with actual authors. So not just what people wrote, but to see what people were saying. Took some courses, did anything that I could do to learn how somebody else does it. Because if it worked for that person, it might work for me. I can try it, right? And then that helps me to, I guess, not make some of the same mistakes that author made, or to save time, because now I've learned, right? This is how you do it. I don't have to go and figure it out on my own. This person has told me how they did it, and now I can do the same thing. So pay attention to that. Learn what the best practices are for writers. And for people who are in the publishing industry, how do you write a good query letter? How do you approach a publisher? And again, I've written about that in my blog, so read it. It's right there. You can go back and take a look at some of that stuff. I'll go ahead and link it down at the bottom. So combining all these things, you're going to start to learn what works and what doesn't work, and try to apply it to your own writing. Okay, the next thing is to evaluate your progress. So you don't want to just read a bunch of stuff, take a bunch of classes, write, and just keep doing the same thing. Is you want to evaluate it. Okay, so is your next book better than the last book? What did you learn by writing this first book that you can apply to your second book? And what can you apply from those to the next book? What did you learn in that workshop that you can apply to your work? Evaluate constantly how you're doing. What are you learning? What do you still need to learn? What's still not working? So constantly evaluate and make note of what's not working, so that you can work more on that, right? Take more classes, read more books about that particular thing. Like for me, I know for a long time, I always do. It's just me. I guess it's me in description, but I had problems with descriptions, and so it's like so anytime I can, I read about that, or when I'm reading a novel, I'll look and see, oh, how did they describe it? That was interesting, that was unique. And I try to do that, right? So it's like, okay, I like the way that this person described a sunset. Then, how can I describe a sunset in that way? Bring in those feelings that this other author did. How did they make me see the sunset? How did they make me see the baby that was sleeping and the feelings that came out? Okay, so I try to evaluate all the time. Am I learning? Am I applying the things that I'm learning? And if I'm not, I need to do that. Okay, so constantly reevaluate how you're doing. And ultimately, what I want you to feel is okay with that slower progress. You don't have to write a book and publish it and have it be hugely successful in 1 year. It's fantastic if that happens. It's wonderful. We all want to have instant success, but be patient and don't expect it to be overnight. Be okay with that learning process. Be okay with the journey that takes a little bit more time, because honestly, if you go a little slower and you constantly improve and you learn and you reevaluate and you keep reading and you keep doing all these things, you're eventually going to become successful. And again, define that for yourself. How do you know when you're successful? How will you know? Well, depends on what you want. Right? Do you want to, again, write for a very small market? Do you want to write for a large market? Do you want to sell tons of books? Do you want to work with a traditional publisher? Do you want to self-publish? And what will make you successful? I know some self-published authors are happy not to work with a publisher. They're happy to work on their own, knowing that they probably aren't going to sell as many books. And they're okay with that. It makes them some extra income. They get to write what they want to write without an editor telling them what to do, or a publisher, the fear of them dropping you and all of that. Some writers are okay with that. It's like, okay, I'll sell a few hundred books. And then maybe the next book, I'll sell an extra couple of hundred books, and I'm okay with that. And if I'm growing a little bit at a time, I'm successful. So you need to define that for yourself, but also, accept that the slower pace is okay. It doesn't have to be, super stardom. But if that happens, then of course that's wonderful. But don't be hard on yourself and thinking that you're failing because your first book didn't reach 100,000 readers, because honestly, it rarely happens. And we become better writers. Sometimes when it does happen for someone where the first book is, it becomes a sensation. It's harder for that author actually to write the next book and say, how am I going to compete with my own book, that, my own bestseller? And it's harder. So be grateful that if it takes you a little bit of time, and be happy with that slow growth. All right. And if you want to read more about this topic, I will link my blog below. Share the link and like the video, and I'll see you again next Friday.